So far in our Gaming PC Basics series, we've given a component overview, introducing you to everything you might need for your build, and then we did a deep dive into CPUs. Last week, we also took a close look at some webcams, which are becoming a requirement for almost any new PC. Today, we're going to examine the component that I get more questions about than any other: the case. What's up guys, my name is Brian and welcome back to the Gaming PC Basics series. Hopefully you've found some good information in the previous videos, and if you missed them, I'll leave a link down below. Down there you'll also find links to the products featured in this video if you're interested in learning more. Don't forget that if you find this video helpful, to get subscribed to the channel and hit that bell icon so you don't miss upcoming entries into this series. Also, that like button is down there too, I'm just saying. Today's video is all about the case. Now, while it's technically true that you don't actually need a case to have a functioning gaming PC, having a bunch of random parts wired up and lying on your floor isn't ideal, and it also isn't the safest thing either. So we're going to go ahead and say that every PC, regardless of its intended function, needs a case. But because cases have the most variety, the most manufacturers, and the most personal feel of any of your components, choosing one can often be difficult, if not impossible sometimes. So do you want a big case, a medium case, or a small case, black or white, side window or no window, airflow or maximum RGB, included fans or no fans? Will you be building with a lot of hard drives? Do you have a lot of accessories that need to be plugged in? Do you still somehow have an optical drive? The list of questions goes on, and while it would be impossible for me to address every single one, I think we can distill your choice down into several different reasonable decision points: size, price, desired use, cooling needs, and appearance. First up is size. This is far and away the most important thing to think about when building your system. How much desk space do you have? What other components have you already committed to? PC cases come in three basic sizes: ATX, Micro ATX, and Mini ITX. On my left is the Fractal Design Torrent, and we'll be using it for several demonstrations today. It's a fairly good representation of a large, high-end case from a well-known manufacturer with lots of cool little features we can demo. This is an ATX mid-tower, probably the most common form factor out there. There are also ATX full towers, which, as the name implies, are just slightly larger versions of the same basic cases. An ATX case will be compatible with the widest range of hardware. It will have a large interior area and can support full-size motherboards, full-size power supplies, and full-size graphics cards. One of the great things about PC hardware in general is that the larger form factor items are also compatible with smaller hardware. You can mount a Micro ATX motherboard in a full-size ATX case. The standoffs will still be in the right place. You can also use a mini graphics card or an SFX power supply. But the reason that you might buy an ATX case is because they are generally more fully featured and give you the ability to easily fit all of your components. The downside? They're often large and heavy. They're cumbersome to move around, could be difficult to clean, and can be problematic if you have a small desk space to work in. They also tend to be more expensive on average, if for no other reason than because they just use more material. Next up is Micro ATX. This is the least popular form factor for cases, and as a result, you'll find the least variety out there. In reality, it provides a nice middle ground for size versus functionality. These cases are usually significantly smaller than ATX chassis, and most can still fit full-size power supplies and graphics cards. However, you will need a smaller motherboard, which will carry the same designation as the case itself, which is Micro ATX. These cases have a smaller footprint and are often lighter, but they do come with trade-offs like less front I/O or reduced options for storage devices. And lastly, we have Mini ITX. These cases have been trending popular over the past few years as people's need for large storage arrays has decreased and the quality of smaller components has significantly increased. Mini ITX cases are the smallest and most portable, and as a result, some of them come with handles or other carrying methods that make it easy to take to a LAN party or a friend's house. Mini ITX cases require Mini ITX motherboards, and some also require the use of shorty power supplies and graphics cards. Because of the engineering required to make some of these enclosures, Mini ITX cases are often priced more like ATX cases than micro ATX ones. You see a lot of manufacturers pushing the boundaries of how small these can be made, with some of them coming in at just a few liters of volume. Next up, let's talk price, and this is pretty straightforward. Once you decide on what size of a case you're going to need, figure out what portion of your budget can go towards a case. I think a good general rule of thumb is that you want to allocate about 10% of your total system budget here. So if you're aiming for a $1,000 system, a $100 case or so is very reasonable. If you have your heart set on buying this guy at around $200, well, it makes very little sense if you only have $800 total. It really restricts the rest of your build and doesn't give you much in return versus spending that extra money on a better graphics card or more RAM. Okay, so you've decided that you want an ATX case and you have about $150 to spend on one. What is the next thing that you should consider? That would be your use case. What will you be using the system for? Given that this video series is called Gaming PC Basics, I would assume a lot of you want to use it for gaming. But there's more to it than that. Will you also be streaming? Will you want to record every second of your gameplay for analysis or uploading to YouTube? Will you have friends over while battle royaling and want them to stare at your beautiful system? Will you be using it in a situation where it needs to be as quiet as possible? Well, these are all different targets to hit. If you'll have a need for a large amount of hard drives for storage of video files, or if you're building a server of some kind, you'll need to make sure that the specifications of your case list support for 3.5-inch drives, and likely a bunch of them. Most cases can fit 1 or 2, but storage arrays can get massive. Cases like the Fractal Define 7 can fit a whole rack of hard disks, but those kinds of cases are becoming rarer. Similarly, if you need a silent build, cases like the Be Quiet Silent Base series is specifically built with thick sound dampening foam, and you'll often see these features highlighted on product pages. What if this build you're doing is going to sit in the front window of a store and needs to draw people's attention but not really do very much else? Well, then forget all that sound dampening nonsense and craziness with the hard drives. You need a giant glass window and lots of interior lighting. Or maybe you have a bunch of USB drives and accessories that you have to plug into the front I/O. Make it a priority to look for cases with lots of ports here. Use filters on retailer websites to narrow down your search by size and price, and then start combing through the listings to see which case fits your intended purpose. Okay, we're in the home stretch now. We've picked a form factor, we know how much we're spending, and we know what we'll be using it for. Now we need to talk about cooling. This is almost entirely dependent on what other hardware you'll be using with your build. More specifically, the CPU and GPU, which are the major heat generating parts of any PC. As a general rule, the more expensive of a build that you're planning, the more cooling that you'll need. As CPUs get more powerful, they require more cooling. Don't forget, CPUs of the same generation are all the same form factor, so whether you have 4 cores or 16 cores and run at 3000 megahertz or 5000 megahertz, it's all contained within the same small package. So as thermodynamics dictates, the extra energy needed to make these parts go will also result in more heat. When talking about cooling capacity in a case, you need to take into account 2 main things: how many fans it can fit and what are the airflow pathways like. Take the Torrent, for example. It can fit a total of 7 standard size fans, 3 at the front, 3 at the bottom, and 1 at the rear. This is pretty typical for a case of this size, and generally, this will also translate to the amount of radiator space that you have as well. The Torrent also has a ton of airflow coming from the front of the case where the intake fans are, because this front grille area is completely open. Because the top is closed, that means that lots of air can be forced into the case through the front, and it can primarily exit through the rear. So any fresh air that comes in blows directly across your components, keeping them as cool as possible. At least that's the idea. This doesn't mean that this is the only way to do things, but this is something that you should try to pay attention to. If you have a high-powered system and a case that doesn't promote proper airflow, you'll have high temps, your fans will spin faster and louder, and you'll have worse performance overall as your super expensive parts run slower to compensate for the high heat. And then the last thing that you need to consider is appearance. This may sound weird to people because the first thing that most people notice about a PC is how it looks. However, if this is your primary concern, you've skipped a bunch of very important steps. I'll be honest, expensive cases tend to look better. So what if you picked a case strictly on how it'll look in your setup, then realize that it costs $300 and your entire budget is shot? Or you had your heart set on something like this Lian Li TU150, only to figure out that you can't fit your hardware in it. Or you really are digging that case made almost entirely of glass, only to realize that your GPU is completely choked for air. This part of the decision-making tree is going to be subjective, so I'll leave the evaluation of appearance to you. But just know that it should be the last thing that you consider when making a case purchase. But yeah, find one that looks cool if you can. Of course. So that's it for our look at PC cases and how to choose one. I want to give a thank you to Fractal Design for sending over their new torrent. I'm sure we'll be doing more with this case in the future. Don't forget to get subscribed and check out other videos in this series. Drop a like down below and consider following me on Twitter. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.